Hello and welcome to another episode of Who Knew in the Moment, the podcast. I'm your host, Phil Friedrich. And today I'm excited to share a little bit about my story. So I'm going to give you guys kind of the early years of Phil and talk a little bit about some formidable memories that I have that certainly as I reflect back on my life have been really important to where I've gone and where I've become. So for those of you maybe listening for a first time, this is episode 231 of the podcast. It is ranked in the top 2% of all podcasts in the world. And so super excited about what we're doing, but want to share a little bit about the guy that's usually behind the scenes asking the questions. So just to kick it off, originally from Wisconsin, my folks moved to Nebraska, and so I call Nebraska home. But one of the things that started early on in my life is my dad said, hey, if you want to earn some money, you got to do some extra things around the house. And so one of the tasks that he had was picking the weeds from his yard. And what I'll tell you is my dad is a smart cookie. So it was a Blue Bunny 1 gallon pail. And what would happen is if I could fill up the whole pail with weeds that I had picked from his yard, I would earn $1. Now, his yard was not big enough to fill up a whole 1 gallon pail in one picking of weeds. So what would happen is I would go through, I'd pick the yard, I'd fill the gallon pail up, and then since it wouldn't be full, I didn't get the full dollar. And then those weeds would shrivel up. So then I would have to pick it again, a week or 2 weeks later as the weeds would come back. And typically it would take about 3 picks to fill up the whole bucket, even after everything had shrunk down. So what I tell people oftentimes is at the time, it was just the idea of $1. I really wanted it. And I was like, holy cow, I would do anything to get this dollar. If I have to do 3 weed picks, that would be great. And the funny part is it helped me learn, a great work ethic. Now, in addition to that, I give my dad a lot of credit for, my parents credit for what I know about personal finance. And not that they taught me about investing or anything like that, but what my dad did do is he said, hey, with this dollar, what you need to do is you need to take a quarter of that and you need to give it to the church. You need to take a quarter of it, put it in your piggy bank, and then you can have 50 cents to go spend. Now, I didn't really grow up in a time where 50 cents could buy you anything, but it helped me learn the principle and the value of $1, which ended up being super important as I've progressed in my career with what I do today and what I do in the real estate space. So anyway, that was one of the first memories I have of working really hard to accomplish something and having work ethic to be able to accomplish it. Now, my parents are both W-2 employees. So my dad and my mom both have worked in the education system for most of their lives. So the idea of entrepreneurship was a foreign concept in my household. And, really as far back as we go, my grandpa on my dad's side was a pastor. My grandpa on my mom's side worked at a paper mill. My grandma worked at a grocery store. So there wasn't this entrepreneurial bug in our household. However, there was a gentleman up in Wisconsin, where I'm from, that sold basketball cards. And I remember I loved to spend some of the money I earned on basketball cards. And the problem was, though, sometimes you would get duplicates or you get cards that you didn't want. And so what I would do is I would repackage those cards and the ones I didn't want, and I would sell them. And what we would call them is a mystery pack. And so what I would use is I would use clear plastic and I would shove basketball cards into clear plastic. But inside of every box that I would create, I would tell people that there's one Michael Jordan card and there's one Magic Johnson card in there. And I wasn't lying. But what they would do then is they would buy these cards and I would be able to get rid of some of the ones I didn't want and my duplicates. But I did have to give up some of my good ones. But the beauty of it is it kind of taught me this entrepreneurial thing of like, hey, if you create something and there's a demand for it, people will buy that. And so that's really the way I first learned about entrepreneurship. Was I would sell some of my basketball cards, were the ones I really didn't like. Now, I didn't always want to get rid of my Michael Jordans, but I felt like if I can make more money, then I could go buy additional cards and maybe I'd get more Michael Jordan cards. So that was one of the first entrepreneurial things that I ever did. Once again, when I was 6, 7 years old. I didn't really understand what entrepreneurship was, but as I reflect on it, that was kind of that first moment. Now, basketball, kind of tying into basketball cards, became a really important thing for me in so many aspects of my life. And today we won't get into all of it, but growing up, my brother Micah played basketball. And as the younger brother, you always wanted to be like the older brother. And then one of my best friends, Sean, he was really good at basketball. And so my brother was 6 years older than me, and Sean was 4 years older than me. And so I just always wanted to be around them and play. And so I constantly was. And one day, there was a university in Seward, Nebraska called Concordia University. And one day I went up there to go shoot hoops at the gym, but I didn't know that the college team was having practice. And so I pulled up a chair because the doors into the gym were locked. I pulled up a chair and I stood on the chair and I watched through this small little window as they practiced. And I remember one of the guys came up to the door right where I was standing, and I had to get off my chair really quick and move it. And he got a drink and he goes, "Hey, would you like to come in and watch practice?" And I was floored. Absolutely. I wanted to go in and watch practice. And so when they asked me to come and watch practice, I showed up and I stayed for the whole practice. I just kind of sat there quietly and watched. I didn't know anyone. Well, at the end of that, the coach came up and said, "Hey, who are you?" And I introduced myself, and I just asked how frequently they got together and practice. And he goes, "Well, we do we do it every day." And so I asked for the schedule, and he goes, "Well, if you come tomorrow, we'll practice at this time, and I'll give you a schedule." And he gave that to me. And eventually I showed up every single day, and I would pick up balls or I would rebound for a guy. And they started really ingraining me into the system. And so I became the ball boy. And that was really where I developed this like passion and love for basketball. And that was probably around like fifth grade for me. And I was surrounded by guys that were taking it very seriously. It wasn't just showing up and playing horse; it was like real basketball. And so that really tipped off my desire to train and to get better. I was watching these guys do intense workouts and start lifting weights, and I really wanted to figure out what would it take for me to be able to perform at the college level. So I ball boyed for them all the way until I got to high school, and that was a really fun thing for me. Now, along the way, I also was delivering newspapers. So, my parents, I come from a very middle class family. We had everything we could ever need in life, and a lot of the things we wanted, but certainly not everything. And so there was just kind of this understanding that, hey, if you really wanted something, you would need to earn your own money to do that. And so my brother had a paper route, so I would assist him. And then eventually I got my own paper route as well. So from like fourth grade until senior year of high school, I had a paper route where I would get up every morning, and kudos to my dad or my mom. If my dad was out of town for work, they would drive me to pick up the newspapers, and then we would fold them and then get out and get those delivered. And the funny thing was, I'm old enough where we didn't have cell phones then. And so if we didn't have newspapers to certain people by 6 a.m., they would call the house phone. And my mom always told me, "You better have those newspapers out by 6 a.m. because I do not want any phone calls waking us up." And so I learned very early, one, if you want to wake up early, or if you want to have success, you should get up early. And so that finance aspect that my dad taught me with the dollar then correlated when I started making $100, right? Because I was delivering newspapers. And that really set me up to understand the principles of finances, or at least where money should go, how to spend it, how to save it, and eventually how to use that. And so as I look at, the newspaper route and I look at basketball, those were two things that were going on at the same time. And the beauty for me was when I would get done with my newspaper route, I would oftentimes go to the gym before I would go to school. And there was a guy that was the assistant coach at Concordia at the time, and super nice guy, give him a ton of credit for everything that he taught me. He was a great mentor, gave me one of my favorite books, Mind Gym, one of my favorite books to this day. But I'll never forget one day, I was practicing my dribbling drills in the gym, and sometimes he would stay, sometimes he would just open up and leave. But I was practicing, and I was going fast, but I was never losing the basketball. And he stopped me and he goes, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, I'm doing my dribbling drills." He goes, "Well, yeah, but you haven't messed up yet." I go, "I know, I'm doing so well, right?" And he goes, "I mean, you're doing well, but if you don't ever mess up, you're not going to get as good, or you're not going to get better like you should. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, Phil, the whole point of practicing is to push yourself as hard as you possibly can. And in pushing yourself as hard as you can, you'll actually get better. And if you don't ever push yourself as hard as you can, you'll stay the same. You won't get as good as you possibly could. And so that was a really important lesson for me, because that's probably like fifth grade. And that was probably the first time someone had ever told me it was okay to fail, because by failing, or by, not perfecting something, I would actually get better. And that was a lesson that, once again, at the time, I probably didn't fully grasp, but today I revel in, and I think is so important for so many to learn that in pursuit of getting to be really good at something, oftentimes you have to push yourself past your comfort zone. And in that past comfort zone, we oftentimes feel insecure, inadequate. And, I like the phrase that is, if you ever want to swim across the ocean, at some point, what you would have to do is lose sight of the shore. And I think that's so true in anything we do, right? As we're pursuing or attempting to get better, to get great at something, we oftentimes have to push ourselves past the comfort zone and get outside of our norm. And I think that has been something that has helped me in so many aspects of my life. But the second thing that this assistant coach did was, I had a phase in life where I was a bit overweight, and he just shared with me, he goes, hey, Phil, you're out of shape, man. And at that weight, at your height, you'll never play college basketball. And once again, I was in fifth grade, and I remember thinking, man, that's a little harsh, but it was the brutal honesty, and it was exactly what I needed. So that started me on the journey of like working out, having a clean diet, and really focusing in on my ability to do everything I could to give myself the opportunity to play college basketball. So about the same time, my parents were very focused on grades. So kudos to my mom. She's actually the first generation college graduate in her family, who ended up going to get a master's, going to get a doctorate. So extremely successful in her credentials. And then my dad, similarly, he had folks that had gone on to college and additional degrees, but they always had this kind of focus on academic excellence and academic success. And so it was, I think, fourth or fifth grade. And, you get your report card sent home with you. And I had gotten a B+ in one of my classes, and the rest were all A's. And I'll never forget my parents kind of sitting me down and really having a tough conversation with me, in which the ultimate conversation was, you're grounded because you got this B+. And I remember being like, this is so unfair. Like, I have friends that got C's and their parents are taking them on pizza parties. And here I am getting a B+ and I'm getting grounded. And one of the most important conversations that ever transpired for me with my parents was, they were kind of telling me, hey, or they asked the question, well, why didn't you get an A? And I really didn't have a good answer for them, right? I was like, well, I probably didn't try as hard as I could have. I probably could have put in more effort, like whatever it was. And my dad just asked me a really important question. And at the time, once again, I didn't know the magnitude of it. But in hindsight, it's really transformed the way I look at everything. And he just asked the question, he goes, were you capable of an A? I was like, yeah, I guess I was capable of an A. I mean, I got an A in all my other classes. So yeah, I was capable of it. And he goes, so that is the thing that you need to focus on, not why didn't you, but were you capable of it? And so one thing that I share with people all the time is, expectations are really difficult for a lot of people. People have expectations of us. We have expectations of ourselves. And I think at the end of the day, the idea of an expectation really in itself is not a bad thing. I tell people frequently, without my parents' high expectations, I would not be where I'm at today. I would have never reached certain levels of career success or personal development without their nudge on, hey, here's what's possible for you. I think the problem that certain people fall into, or the trap, is if you hear well, if you don't hit this high expectation we have of you, we're not going to love you, or we won't care about you as much, or you're not as good of a human as, X, Y, and Z person. That's where this unhealthy relationship with expectations comes from. And I've seen that with, my family, I've seen that with friends. And I think that's a really important differentiator. Is the gift of high expectations is that people care about you enough that they're going to push you to get to where they think you're possible. They're going to help you, strive to reach the level of success that they know you're capable of, because they know the skills and the abilities that you have. On the flip side, though, if you hear, hey, if you don't hit this, if you don't get an A, then we don't love you, that's where the miss happens. And so I had a gentleman on the podcast early on. His name's Caleb Campbell, and he shared a really impactful story. And that was he was really good at football, ended up playing in the NFL. And his mom, after one of the games in grade school, told him, wow, honey, you did such a great job. You scored so many touchdowns. I love you. And what he heard was, if I get touchdowns, you will love me. And the flip side, he also connected in his head, if I don't get touchdowns, you won't love me. And so he said, that's what really fueled my desire for football. Was I wanted to be loved by my mom. And I thought the only way she would love me is if I was scoring touchdowns. And so that is the risk we run with these expectations, is when people start misinterpreting them. And so what I would just encourage you, if you're a parent out there, and you're wanting your child to strive for more, you want them to have the best, or maybe every opportunity, even opportunities you haven't had. I think it's correlating what's the expectation and what's the outcome. And what I mean by that is, the reason I have the expectation that you should or could get an A is because you have all the skill sets necessary to get it. I don't have this assumption or expectation that you're going to get an A and then you're going to earn my love, though. And I think that is something that as children, we don't understand in what our parents are telling us, even though your parent's not saying, I won't love you if you don't get an A. But sometimes we can interpret it that way when we're young. So that would just be, an encouragement to the business leader, the parent, the spouse. Don't tell them, hey, you need to do this if you want this from me, but tell them, hey, I know you're capable of it, but do you want that? And so that's a question I ask myself all the time is, am I capable, or what more am I capable of? And that's what has continued to propel me and encourage me to move forward. Now, when we talk about, formation of habits, I think that's so important. So for me personally, early mornings has always been a habit. Once again, I would work out in the morning, I deliver newspapers every morning. And so that just really became a habit of my life. But I also really got to see a great example of my dad. Most mornings he would be out the house or out of the door by 6:30 in the morning. And usually he would come home about 6 or 6:30 at night. And so, the idea of a strong work ethic was really important to me. Now, the second thing that I saw that was subconscious to me, but now as I reflect back on it, has been really important, is kind of that give and take that you have to have in a relationship. So, a little insight, my dad originally was a pastor, and after being pastoral work, decided to get into fundraising at the university level. And so when he did that, my mom was a Lutheran schools teacher, and she had to take some time to kind of transition and figure that out. Now, my mom went on to get her master's, and she taught at the college level. And then later on, she went to get her doctorate, and she now teaches at the college level. And I think one of the best lessons I ever learned from them is, relationally, and this could be, if you're married, you're in a relationship, it could just be with your friends. And that is, sometimes you have to sacrifice what's best for you to make what's best for someone else, or what's best for the overall dynamic. And so, my mom could have been a university professor much earlier on in her life, had my dad taken a back seat and given her career number one, and vice versa. My dad had the success that he had career-wise because my mom was willing to take a little bit of a backseat career-wise for him. And so I think that is, humility and just humbleness, not humility, humbleness at its finest. And just saying, hey, I'm willing to support you because I know you're capable of it, right? Coming back to that question, what are we capable of? And I think that's super important. So that's just a word of encouragement to, anyone that's in a relationship dynamic, or anyone that's kind of, rocking and rolling through their life. Hey, what are the areas that are really important for you, and what are the areas of life that you can support someone else because you know what they're capable of. And sometimes we just need a little bit of nudge and encouragement to be able to get there. Now, going into high school, basketball was my thing. I absolutely loved it. And my freshman year of basketball, I just played on the freshman team. Kind of had an unwritten written rule at the school that our head coach had, and that was freshmen don't play varsity. There was only one kid in his entire 25 years of coaching that ever made varsity as a freshman. And so my freshman year was a really important year of basketball for me because it allowed me to kind of become the number one scoring option. And I needed that boost of confidence. Really, my whole life, I was just kind of like a shooter, supporting some of the other guys. And then I got to freshman year of high school, and I really kind of became the scorer. And then when I got to varsity as a sophomore, a junior, and a senior, my roles translated all the time. But basketball really became something that gave me a lot of confidence. It was something that I excelled at. It was something that I had developed a passion for. And it was always funny because my friends would give me a hard time. They'd go to the pool and I'd go to the gym. And then, they'd be super tan and I wouldn't be super tan because I'd been staying in the gym all day while they were out at the pool. But I didn't ever feel like I was missing out on anything because I really just wanted to be great at basketball. That was what my passion was. And so although maybe I wasn't having all of the same social interactions, that didn't really bother me. I wanted to really hone in and focus on my craft. And so that's something that, as I look on today in my business has been really important as well. There's so many opportunities that we get. And I'll be first to admit, I'm bad at saying no to things. I say yes to a lot of things I maybe shouldn't even say yes to. But the one thing I would say is that as I've been able to grow my career, saying no to things that really weren't going to help me get to my ultimate goal was something that I had to learn and be okay with. And I think starting with basketball and missing out on some social aspects of life were okay with me. Today I don't drive the nicest car, but that's because I'd rather buy a rental real estate property than to have a nicer car. And I think once again, those small principles I was learning through basketball end up helping me in my full life. And the last tidbit I will share with you guys today, and then we'll follow up with part 2, part 3 of the later years, but is how I got into the financial planning world. So once again, kind of had that entrepreneurial bug I shared with you about, the basketball cards and, wanting to pick weeds at my dad's house to make a little extra money. But I went to school to play basketball. That was kind of my number one decision. And then I knew I was going to focus on business. Well, I never loved the college world. I kind of felt like I'd rather just go get real life experience, but I wanted to play basketball. And so my parents hate when I say that because they're both in education. So this is not a reflection on them. But as I think about that, going into college, I kind of knew, hey, I wanted to find some real life application and opportunity. And so I Googled top 10 financial internships in the United States. And the only one that was in Nebraska was in Lincoln. And so I was in a town about 40 minutes away from the office in Lincoln. And so I cold called in, and this lady named Amy, shout out to Amy, gets put on the phone with me, and she goes, hey, they said you're a freshman and we don't hire freshmen. So if you want to call me back in 2 years, we would love to give you an interview at that time. To which I said, hey, I'd just love to come in and get the real life experience of an interview, especially with a firm, as prestigious as yours. It's top 10 internship. To which she said, all right, if you're going to drive here, that sounds good. So I drove from Seward to Lincoln in Nebraska here, and I got my first interview. And after my first interview, she said, "Hey, I'm going to give you a homework assignment. And I'm going to move you on to interview two." So in my head, I'm like, all right, like, I think this is working well. Mind you, I don't even own a suit, guys. I showed up in a button-down shirt, khaki pants, and a bad tie. I looked like I was going to homecoming, probably a little bit emo style. And so anyway, though, she moves me on to the second interview. And I drive again from Seward to Lincoln, another 40 minutes there, 40 minutes home. And after the second interview, Amy moves me on to the third interview. And she had told me in the first interview, like, hey, we do a 3 interview process. So I'm gonna move you on to the third one. And the third one I knew was where they decided, do they hire you or not hire you? And so I'm like stoked. I'm like, man, I've worked my way into the rotation. Like I may actually have a chance at this. And so I drive once again another 40 minutes there to interview with this guy named Dan. And Dan and I are sitting there talking. And after about 2 minutes of chit chat, he said to me the exact same thing Amy had said to me on the phone before I had ever interviewed. He goes, "Hey, Phil, Amy had great things to say about you. Once again, thank you so much for interviewing with us. However, we don't hire freshmen. So just give us a call back in 2 years. And at that point in time, we would love to extend an offer to you." And my arrogant 19-year-old self, I look at the guy and like in my head, I'm sitting here like, are you kidding me? Like you asked me to drive 40 minutes to spend 2 minutes to tell me I didn't get the job. Like this is dumb. And anyway, I said back to him as about bluntly as I could. I said, hey, I really appreciate the kind words and that offer in 2 years, but if you don't hire me today, like I'm not going to call back. I'm not going to come back. And he looked at me and he goes, "All right, you're hired." And that is how I got started in the financial planning world. And so, the funny thing for me was the interview still only lasted about 3 minutes, but had it ended at 2 minutes, I wouldn't have had the job and who knows where I would end up. But because I was willing to, stand up for myself and I probably had a little too much arrogance, I ended up getting the job and the opportunity where I'm at 13 years later. So I hope something about this resonates with you, either just reflecting on those early years and learning work ethic, the idea of having expectations and maybe how people's expectations have actually weighed you down in your life in a way to flip the script and have it be a positive for you, or, a different way to look at expectations. And then I think the last thing that I would, hope that you took away from today is just, sacrifice for others. There's been so many people that have poured into me. I had a painting made when I graduated from college and it had self-made on it. And I always thought I was self-made because I was blazing a trail of my own in a world or in an industry that no one else in my family had ever been. And what I realized is I may have self-made that, but I certainly didn't get there on my own. There's been so many people that have been supportive and supported me throughout my time. So I hope something about today is a great takeaway. This is part one. We'll continue on my journey, but this at least gets you up to that point. So if you ever wonder, man, why the heck is that Phil guy so odd or weird, you can start seeing my younger years and how it's helped form who I am today. So thanks so much for tuning in. I hope you guys are having a great day and we'll look forward to following up again soon.